Welcome to the River Garden and a presentation on Grace Care's Be for Peace project. My name is Zooey Kopp. I am co-founder and current president of Grace Cares. And by my side is Namaya, who is the Art Brat for Peace, co-founder of Grace Cares and the director of the Be for Peace art projects. Today, we want to share with you how we work with art to create the beloved community and how we think that art can be a potent force for healing and discovering a way forward.
Great, yes. Peace isn't just the absence of war or violence. It's the presence of love. And this is the motif that animates us through so many of the projects, both the art projects, our community development projects, is creating this community of peace, as we've done in New Orleans this past winter for several months, working with the community on the impact of gun and gun violence, both in the community and in an international project with host sites in Australia and around the world, simultaneously coming together, talking about the impact of gun and gun violence. So in this project that we're hosted by the River Garden is creating this conversation about the impact of militarism, the cost of militarism, do Black Lives Matter, the cost of war, and ecocide.
We've been lucky to be able to work with people from different cultures and faiths. I think that's one of the keynotes in our presentations. And the projects that we do, that we seek out a wide variety of audiences around the world. And we try, and I'm going to let you take care of this, Namaya, speak the truth to power, using the principles of satyagraha.
And the idea, as many people know, is the Gandhian principle is satyagraha, which he had formulated in the early 1900s in his original anti-apartheid work, again, 1901, 1902. And his vision of this word is not just speaking truth to power, but being truth to power. And as you meditate on this in his book, Ahimsa, and his other writings, it's how he was able to develop this concept of a soul force, of being this witness, not just witness for this idea of peace, but being deeply rooted in the presence for peace. And the ways that we incorporate this is from the philosopher Paulo Freire, a Brazilian philosopher. And the Brazilian philosopher really came to this idea of how do you engage people in this dialectic? How do you engage people not just in this conversation? And what he really wanted to do in his work with the most impoverished of people is to talk to them on their gut level. And one of the examples we use is where Paulo Freire would be talking to the most impoverished of people, and he would say, well, what is it to be poor? And he said, well, that's a stupid question. Poor means have no money. And then as he engaged in that conversation, what it really came down to, the person may say, the peasant, may say, I have no hope for my children. And so you bring this idea, and what he talks about is this idea of conscientization, or awareness. And what we try to elicit, particularly in the peace projects or the peace arts project, and I always look at this as my job as an artist and as a poet, is to ask questions. That's the real key of what art does. It's that dialectic question. And as I have in this drawing here of shattering with this question mark, you shatter the indifference of hate, of violence. And this is the thing that we hold in our hands, is the question mark. Not guns, but the question mark. Speak truth to power, question authority. In every way that people do and engage this conversation, how, through art, through activism, through your witness, engage and create this beloved community.
Thank you. And we travel around with simple messages that we think galvanize people, like be not peace is not just the absence of war, but the presence of love as a way to move forward. And actually, recently in Brattleboro, Namaya did a workshop with a bunch of young people in an elementary school here, and shared with them how creating peace, creating art, thinking of peace, creates an internal meditation, and also a good basis to start thinking about actions you can take in your daily life to create kindness and peace.
And one of the fun things for us is working with children. That probably animates us most. This was from my children's CD called On the Island of Bingabanga, the War That Never Was. And on the island of Bingabanga, and the children basically in this story find ways to defeat an army, but not through war and violence, but through kindness, through love, and through presence. And this, we're continuing with the children's play, which I'm hoping to have produced next year, is called The House of War, The House of Glass. And this continued thing is a play about children who come together and see the differences and yet are able to forge this common ground. And in particular with children, and especially with artwork, we really engage them in this conversation. Children are so open. I think as adults, we tend to be kind of fixed in our notions, even the artist. And so the question is engaging in this conversation. And this is also how we do in our community projects. We work with very small community projects, and we always invite people to say, how would you do this? Even though we may have expertise, we say, how would you do this? What's your approach? What's your vision? And how to incorporate this. And I think as one of the roles that I do in a number of the artwork is just simply holding up the mirror. Just holding up the mirror. Just a reflection. And I think that's one of the critical things. The artist holds up the mirror to society, looking at yourself, perhaps in a different way.
And I think one of the ways that we've done that, and you've helped do this, is in our project in the Dominican Republic with Project Hearts, where they don't have safe drinking water. Namaya wrote a poem about the right to clean water, and with the help of the local people translated it. They then made it into a huge banner, and they have marched all over the island with it, telling people that they have a right to stand up for clean water. And so we try to make ways to inspire and participate is really key to what we're doing.
And again, it's nothing fancy, and it's very simple. As we worked with the community, we created as a huge board and just simply said, agua es mi derecho humano. Water is my right, my human right. And so to me, it's really inspiring when you're seeing people doing this project on a very simple community level, standing in front with this big 7-foot board that everybody painted and said, water is my right, my human right. I deserve clean water.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we need to bring this to Flint, Michigan.
Yeah. Bring it back home. But, and so this, what we want to go over now and what this slide shows is to us some of the key ingredients of success. And it really is developing genuine engagement and relationships with the community that you're working with and identifying what their needs are and how you can best partner with them. And that's true for our programs to get water or to work specifically on art, and often we combine the two.
One of the projects that you'll see in the next thing is a human rights project that we did on a residency at Villa Grimaldi in Santiago, Chile. And it was the site where the Pinochet regime, sponsored by the US government, planned by the US government, and created the coup d'etat that destroyed democracy in Chile in 1973. And it was the first 9/11.
9/11, it was the first 9/11, and what's really interesting, this is part of our decision when we do a project, is where to have it. Do you have it in a museum? Select group of people go to museums, or do you choose open parks, like where we're sitting now in the River Garden? We've had activities in the past that bring in lots of people who wouldn't go to a peace activity, but they're here because it's gallery walk. In the case of Chile, we chose a center for torture where the recent president of Chile, Michelle Bachelet, as an 8-year-old was imprisoned because her father had refused to work with the US government and become part of the dictatorship. And then she just recently, in the last month, was elected as the head of the UN Agency on Human Rights.
Wonderful.
So we try to work at places that are need healing, in communities that need healing from an event. This is an event that tore Chileans apart financially, emotionally, brother against brother, sister against sister.
And one of the things that was really probably one of the most deeply moving projects is that when we were doing the residency, many of the people would be at Villa Grimaldi, and Villa Grimaldi was a place where thousands were tortured, hundreds were killed, and on the wall at Villa Grimaldi, welcome, and the wall of Villa Grimaldi is the names of the families who were there. And I still cry every time I think about this, the first time that I saw the names there, and then a woman came in with her children, and the woman was in her 40s. She said, I was a child of 1 when I had to leave with my aunt and uncle. She said, my parents' names are on the wall here. And every year I bring my children back here. I no longer live in Chile, but I bring my children back every year so they can remember their parents. And of course, many times we've told this story, and many times as the emotion of this event happens, and we saw this many times being at Villa Grimaldi in Santiago, Chile. And one of the poems that I have there is called Viento Gritando. And we were in Valparaiso in Chile on the coast. And we were chatting with a woman very late into the night, and I said, well, it's time that we went to bed. And she said, oh, go ahead, I don't sleep at night. And I said, why don't you sleep at night? And then she told this story as a child of 8 living next to a torture center. And every night she would hear the screams. And she would always run to her mother. And she said, I can never sleep at night because the wind is always howling. The wind is always howling. And so these memories and these events that persist. And her
mother was telling her she wasn't hearing screams. She was hearing the wind howling in the night.
And so to us is being there at Villa Grimaldi and partnering with 2 wonderful dance companies. I wrote I did the original design and the choreography and the play, but there in the center, less than 10 meters from where the tower was, the people were tortured, we created this dance performance celebrating the transformation, and this was called Memoria Hablar Dignidad. To remember, to give voice, and dignidad para recordar lo futuro.
Yeah.
And it's
And we did it as a combination of things. We included the 100 Flowers poems in over 100 languages. This was an international center, and so it was incredible watching people come from Italy, from around the world, and seeing the poem in their language and how it really moved them. And so we created an environment of healing in this beautiful rose garden that the Villa Grimaldi Peace Museum had created, transforming a center of torture into an area of peace. And then, as Maya said, we worked with 2 different local dance groups, a more a traditional Mapuche dance group and a dance group from the local university to basically do a dance of the social history of Peru that was really focused on, of Chile, that was really focused on how they have been so victorious in so many ways.
And incorporating the music of Victor Jara, Violeta Parra, and many of the wonderful singers, what they call as Nuevo Canción, is of the new voices of peace that rose up out of the 60s, Salvador Allende, his government that was overthrown by the United States. I always have to take exception when I read in papers, the coup supported or inspired by the US? No, the US planned this. Nevertheless, we had been there, and one of the things I think was so impactful, and it was difficult for the Chilean dancers, instead of like, okay, you guys are Norteamericanos, why are you doing this? What's your intention? And
yeah, this was an incredible story about how you develop partnerships. The Mapuche dance troupe, we had to be interviewed by them, and we stood in the middle of a circle surrounded by 20 dancers, and we had to show that we were worthy of being part of their dance troupe and part of their activity. They had never met any North Americans, and none of the people in the group. And they only knew about the horrible things that our government has done. And they wanted to make sure that we were understood clearly the past history of Chile before they would consent to work with us.
but
And what reason, yeah, why?
this is beautiful. I love this. This is a dance performance I had created with Danza and with the actors and the performers there. And it truly was a privilege.
This is the modern dance troupe, reenacting Viento Gritando. This is a healing ceremony that we had after the performance.
And there's a beautiful song in Spanish called Gracias a la Vida, Give Thanks to Life, which is a catalyst of so much.
En lo económico, en lo político, y por la justicia social. Cómo transformar el dolor y la pérdida en esperanza.
And this is really
Just read along with the words because the local people wrote this introduction, not us.
¿Cuáles son los derechos
And
de los
here
mapuches?
back, less than 10 meters or less than 20 feet in the back is the gates of the torture center, one of the principal torture centers that remain. And then during the performance, it is beautiful to having this opened up and creating this performance with these incredible dancers.
Con mucho respeto, empezamos este juego.
Cuentan los
It
antiguos,
was just an
los
incredibly
abuelos de los abuelos de los abuelos.
And this is this water tower was the center of torture, and the stage is right in front of it. And the doors are usually closed. And for the presentation, we ask that they open the doors to let out the negative energy, the sadness that dwelled within.
And it's always in very simple thing. Silencio es complicidad. Silence is always complicit.
Here is some more of this is the early Miss of Chile enacted by the Mapuche dance troupe.
Fraternidad Ayu.
And this is the modern dance troupe.
And so this is the poem, Viento Gritando, the wind howling in the night. And it was incredible to giving the direction to the dance troupe and seeing them take this idea and move it forward. Put it on pause for a second.
Oops.
But to me, this is fascinating both from an artistic point of view. The poem is based on a dream, so the dancers created this presentation based on the idea of a nightmare. And then at the end of the performance, people moved from the center of the place of torture to where the door to the torture center used to be, and then opened. And having people reading this poem in the many different languages that were there. And also an apology from the Green Party of the United States, which the people of Chile never received. There is Victor Jara, who was killed on September 22nd by the Pinochet government. Cardinal Silva, many of the heroes of human rights. Salvador Allende, Pablo Neruda, the great poet. Pablo, the dancers of Tardanza.
And they created a traditional Mapuche center of the earth diagram for the tower. This is a professor of memory at the local university who interviewed us for class projects.
For 3 hours.
Yeah.
And we got a chance to speak to many university students during this time outside.
La visión que yo tengo de toda experiencia, por más amarga y dolorosa que sea, que ella también puede dar
And the man who actually helped
con ese
was
dolor, con esa amargura,
in the video productions,
con
many
esa
people were victims
frustración,
of the Pinochet
no
regime.
habría generado tantas
Indians.
cosas maravillosas que pasaron en mi vida.
And this woman is particularly amazing. She was 8 months pregnant on September 11th of 1973, and she had to escape over the Andes. And she said she's transformed her life, and it was horrible, but it made her stronger, and now she feels like a citizen of the world.
Did she birth?
Hmm?
Did the birth go
Yes.
healthfully?
Yeah.
Happily ever, well, she and her partner split, child as well, new husband from another country in Europe, and she was part of the exodus of so many Chileans to Europe after 73.
Yeah.
Talked about that,
Spoke of that.
and
It's done on solstice.
that,
And we want to go back. We were just talking about this morning doing more art projects in Chile in the winter of 2019, 2020, kind of continuing this conversation and hopefully with some of the same people.
and we'd like to bring the Mapuche dance troupe would very much like to come here. So, and are continually in touch with us looking at and they are just incredible. So how to bring it here is one of the things that we look at as well. But we do a variety of different kinds of projects.
This one was at Boston Commons, and it was actually, it's kind of cool, I think.
All right.
But there's a part of the wall, we built this 21 foot by 25 feet, I'm not very good in feet, but a big long wall in the center of Copley Square and the occupation. And so this project that we continue here through the eyes of Zionism, how do we, all people, continue to oppose the Zionism that oppresses the people of Palestine?
Is part of that original wall that we made.
Here is,
This was a project that we did for the Pete Seeger's Clearwater Festival in New York talking about the difficulties of crossing the border between Palestine and Israel. And we traveled to Israel and Palestine and experienced the horror of having guns pointed at you while you tried to cross the border. And you were in a cage. And they were being nice to us.
And probably the most strangest, surrealist part is being in a cattle cage. And we have this as a performance project called Witness, Israel, Palestine, A Journey to Peace. So you're basically in cattle cages about 6 feet 2, 3 inches tall. You're like this, the Israeli guards are there, they're armed, and as I'm going through one of the gates between Nablus and Jerusalem, and Americans don't get this, is that there is 13 official ghettos in the West Bank. So people can't easily go from, say, Brattleboro to Dummerston. You have to go through checkpoints, you have to go through permitting. So every part of your life, there's roads you can go on if you're Palestinians, and then there are roads that are Israeli and Jewish only roads. And it's surreal. But the surrealist part...
And that doesn't include Christians either.
It doesn't.
It's Israeli Jew roads.
So as you're standing there, going through the gates from Nablus to Jerusalem to main city, there's a 19-year-old soldier who takes his, it looked like an M6, yeah, it was an M16, takes his M16, he has earbuds on and is playing air guitar while all these people, very strange.
We also, at different events in New Orleans and around the world, do things that appeal to children. And I think one of the most transformative moments for me is listening to a man who's holding his child in his arms, who's playing with this piece of art, and the kid goes, "What is peace, Dad?" And listening to the answer.
And it was so beautiful because we have this on tape. The man says, and it was kind of neat. He just sat down with his child and explained to him what it is to be peaceful. And it was like, so to us, even though I would love to be in a big-ass museum, it's far more entertaining and far more interesting being in a public space, engaging people in these conversations, whether or not it's on Israel and Palestine. And there's a big project which we don't have the sample here, and it really questions, the occupation of Palestine. And one man came forward and started screaming and called me an anti-Semite, anti-Jew, or Jew-hating Jew, whatever that is. And his kids were there, and they said, and I invited him to sit down like we have at many of the public places and said, talk to us. Here, have a glass of water. And we chatted for 45 minutes. And that was great. That's the whole point of it. To engage people in this conversation.
So important.
And this is what Pete Seeger always said. He said, it is so important to talk with people you disagree with. And that was one of his many messages.
Did he end up being, being able to talk to you and not be mad at you?
Well, we probably found out that we're probably first cousins because all Jews from Eastern Europe and Russia were all related. But at the end of it, he said, I don't agree with you, but thank you for taking the time to talk. And I am so touched when, as we travel around and meet people, I heard this incredible story of a black man who collects Ku Klux Klan uniforms. And what this black man, about 60, does is he simply talks to people who are Klansmen. And at the end of it, many of them just give him their robes and they realize that they don't need it. And it's this power of conversation. This is what we try to put forward in the poem, 100 Flowers of Peace, is what is the individual actions we can take, whether or not we're in very humble, simple, no matter what our lives are, but the transformative power that each person can do. Here's a river garden event.
Yeah, we did our event, this is about 10 years actually, with some of our team here. And all of the posters, and we participated in strolling the heifers, bringing our piece art here. And Nick may remember this. We had opened our piece art studio, which will be having an open house on Saturday from 12 to 6, and a story hour for children at noon on Binga Bonga, followed by a make your own piece art time.
And we have all supplies for kids, and you can do all kinds of fun stuff.
As always, we advocate for people who are doing these kinds of projects. Remember how to reduce, reuse, and recycle. It's such a part of what we do. And create partnerships. That's what peace is. Create new and different partnerships wherever.
And this is a project from an art point of view, is designing this original project. But please welcome M16s, Kalashnikov rifles, and then in New Orleans, what we did is this large project with M16s, Kalashnikov rifles, and with streams of bullets coming down, and it's called teardrops. So as these ideas continue to change, we have a slight invitation to do it in Peshawar, Pakistan, since it has the largest arms market in the world. And then boots in the ground. As for me, as a former veteran, or as a veteran, we always talk about this, is how does the impact of war stay with us, and how do we transform, and how do we serve as a witness to the possibility of peace? And through this project on Boots in the Ground, we ask soldiers, veterans, to taking part of their memory, putting it within the boot, and engaging in this conversation. And at the end, planting these boots with flowers in a garden. And it's a play on that word, is boots on the ground, and we say boots in the ground. And how the flowers can transform.
So, you know where to find us. Get your free copy of a peace poem in your own language of choice anytime. And to end on a song.
And this is, Mercedes Sosa, the most famous singer from Argentina, and singing the song Gracias a la Vida.
Thanks to the life that has given me so much, has given me life. Every person, I think, in the cone of South America knows the words. This is their theme song.
Or at least they did.
Hmm?
Or at least they did.
They still do.
Yeah.
As of 3 years ago.
Most of them.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Maybe not so many under 15 years later.
No, they still learn it in school. It's like one of those folk songs they learn. So everybody, you just say Gracias a la Vida, and they break into song. And it's funny, it's just like Chileans. You say Neruda and they break into poems. It's kind of, I don't know about Argentina, but.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, so if you, so what we have at the end, if you're interested, I can walk you through some of the artwork and kind of the broad strokes of what we're trying to do, engaging in this conversation. Do Black Lives Matter? And this is part of a series that was in New Orleans, looking at the impact of police and the violence against the African American and Latino communities. And these other art projects commemorating World War I. It was based on our visit and some of our peace projects at the Imperial War Museum in London, Cross of Iron speech, which many of you know from Eisenhower in 1954, and also looking at the impact of U.S. Pentagon budget over $1.5 trillion. And so what we try to do is put these works out, and even the simple ones like serial killers and immigration rights. So thank you all for coming, and
Be for peace.
be all you can be. Thank you. That with the idea of creating the art, the poetry, whatever that physical thing is that they can give voice. And I think it depends upon what country you're in. You see an artist like Wei Wei, the wonderful Chinese artist. He never does work in China, of course. He'd be in prison. But he makes a fortune in the United States and in Europe. And I would love for Wei to do his work in China. And in Chile, people were very, very open, but again, we are all faced with the international culture of cell phones, text phones. People are constantly focused on this. And in many countries where there was the rich tradition, kids are just... So that's the short answer to a very complex question.
Yeah.
Other questions, comment? Yes?
What, I mean, so if the digital reality is a great, you know, is a obstruction to culture, then what?
Well, I'm going to answer this obliquely in a very brief thing. I had this project that's called Plato's Allegory in 2018. It's a series of sculptures where the figures, like these figures, had their cell phones. You know, and some people, you know, swear that that is is their culture. And I talk with a lot of young people about this, is like, you know, the cell phones and whatever, and that's, but to me, and again, maybe it's my age, but I feel like, okay, I need to talk to you. I need you to look in the eye. And when we're having conversations, how many people, even our age, will be texting? I said, no, what you done? Like, I can hear it. No, you can't. Look at me. And I think this is, to me, is part of the disconnect, is how many times you're having a conversation where you can talk. No cell phones, no TV, no music. You know, we're looking at each other. As the Jamaican expression goes, me be talking with you eye to eye. I'm looking at you. So I think that's vital. It's how do we make this connection in the ways that we do.
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
How do we make this connect?
And you know, that's the wonderful thing about being an artist. I'm only responsible for the questions, not the answers.
I see.
It's,
We're
but
all responsible for the answers.
yeah, but it is, the question is how do we all turn that off? Because I have the cell phone on the side, I'm listening to music, and that's becoming our world, but it was so many times when people are disconnected. Would that make sense? You agree, or what do you think?
Yeah. Even if they don't have their cell phone out, if someone says something to me and they're not looking at me, especially if it's something important, I'll say, could you look at me and say that? You know?
And it's the wonderful thing about being old, more or less, is I tell people is, I can't hear you. I actually have to see your face, which is true. If I can't see your lips, I can't hear you. So you have to look at me. And you see how many people, it's like, it's so hard. Like, look at me, and that way I can hear you. And if I'm talking to a cop, and he's wearing his dark sunglasses, can you take off your eyeglasses, that way I can see you? Is that disconnect. And to me, this is what I appreciate, is when I look at a project like Police and Tamir Rice, you know, like for all of us, we do our art projects, and I think it is this whole idea that we can so have this objectification and I was doing another project this morning, but it was like this thing is, oh, black man with hoodie must be dangerous. It's that, our disconnect.
Or the white people in sheets must be dangerous.
Or the white, I have a project now, I just started doing, so I'm very excited, but
Yeah.
it's gonna be like for here, and it's a Klansman sitting here with the large sign that says, "Do Black Lives Matter," and the other one with the guy with the black hoodie, and says, "Who are you more afraid of?"
Depends on who you are.
Yeah,
Exactly.
skin color of your eyes.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
that's guys. So,
I have a question actually for Sidel, because I've thought about this in your class, where she does entangle classes in Celtic and is very meditative, and it's interesting. How many of your students seek your classes as a way to meditate, not just do their art?
A lot of them, actually.
I had a feeling.
probably because that's the way I put them out most of the time, with the exception of the online Celtic ones. I mean, they're just there for the technique, but mostly I'm teaching, teach workshops and retreats on meditative art and ways to relax. And people sometimes have a hard time sitting, this idea of meditation and going inwards, and this idea of having to sit. I mean, silence is scary enough, but then to sit and not move can be really hard for a lot of people, including myself, which is one reason I also lead labyrinth walks. It's a moving meditation, and so I'm always seeking ways to help people get to that center place, but through creating.
I think, to me that's so important. We do that with our children's peace arts programs, and I think that's why it clicked when I was in one of your classes, because oftentimes getting a child to sit down is hard, but put a crayon in their hand,
And that to me
it can be,
Todd's, this is
gives you
so
this moments with them.
and it's so much fun as we travel around. I always have my art and drawing pad, so I could be on a beach in Dominican Republic, and there are some street kids, and I'm sketching. The kids say, "Que papo?" And I say, "Oh, bienvenido." And suddenly there's 8, 9 kids around, and all my pencils disappear, which is totally cool, but it's so much fun. And I give, here's a pencil. Here's my pencil. It's my big $12 box of pencils. But how wonderful that is for kids. It's the small ways.
The kids can connect, they see the crayon, and it's easy for them to pick that crayon up and go to that place.
Yeah.
Adults are another whole story.
Yeah.
They've been told they can't do that.
Yeah.
Or even doing simple thing like music, because I also travel with my guitar. And people see guitar and they're always like, "Oh, I wish I had mine." I said, "Watch. C, D, E, F, G, W. See, you can do that. C, D, E."
And then he hands them their guitar, and they're like hooked. It's amazing.
And I think that is that power of creativity. And, Krishnamurti was very clear, to live in creativity is to live in freedom. And that power of creativity, because as we talk about so much of media, it's outside. And how many people just sit around and play music, or sit around and just draw or doodle? It doesn't matter if you're good or not. And this is the reason why my work doesn't look like Picasso or something really fine, because I don't want people to be intimidated. I want them to look at this and say, "God, this stuff is like so easy, I can do it." Anyway, kind of. Okay. Anyway, well, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
So we have an innocent bystander who has been reviewing and came upon the show. So what do you think of the show? What's your reflections? in 50 words or less?
Seriously?
Yes.
I think it's great. There's a lot in here to respond to and think about. It's the things that are being addressed here are going on in so many countries in our world. It's just the universal problems of war and the money going to the wrong things. And I appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you.
And I feel like you're really reaching people and letting them participate, helping them participate in voicing their feelings. And I do agree that art is probably a really powerful way to get at change.
I agree.
Or motivation to change.
Great, thank you. My name is Namaya. I'm a poet and an artist, and I've been doing this presentation at the River Gallery in downtown Brattleboro. And this work is a span of about a decade, and it represents some of the work that was shown at the New Orleans Art Center for the retrospective this past winter. And in this show, what we really look at is the themes that are somewhat topical, is I Trump. And this is a series of about 75 art pieces that express my dismay and amazement at our wonderful POTUS. This other work is a work that I actually like doing, is a lot of the simple cartoons like this one, Racism Rots Your Brain, Don't Let the Gremlins of Hate Eat Your Soul, and Resisting Hate, and creating artwork very simply that expresses this idea. Racism rots your brain. This piece here, Ecocide, goes back to 2010, and it's been taken over, and it was also after the BP oil disaster. I also did artwork that represents this on the theme of Stop Ecocide, 100 Flowers of Peace, Let There Be 100 Flowers of Peace That Bloom in the Garden. And this poem has been translated now into 105 languages. It's been at peace centers around the world. It's done at the Imperial War Museum in London, peace centers in Palestine, Chile, and so forth. And if you visit our website at namayaproductions.com, you'll also see music and the story presented. And the theme is very much is resist with love. And the idea of the art rat, which we have created, is, I love the idea of the rat from the detritus and the waste of war. We take all this ugliness, all this hatred from the violence, and we transform it. So we're having this figure of the art rat. From the waste of war, we create art that celebrates the inevitability of peace and resisting with love. On top is a project that was designed originally for Burlington Airport. We are still in discussion, is creating this idea of welcome. We are a nation of immigrants. And this cartoon character here is Uncle Sam, Rasta Sam, bienvenue, marhaba, welcome, bienvenue, human rights for all immigrants. From many lands, we are one nation. And this is, of course, what made this nation great. We are all immigrants, even those who don't think so. We are all immigrants. And as our ancestors were welcomed or not welcomed into this country and created this opportunity, we should also create the opportunity for immigrants who are here and guarantee their human rights. Very simply. This one's a little hard to read, which we're working on a bigger version, is take a kneel and stand against racism. I love the idea of the football player taking a kneel, taking a stand against racism. So I was very inspired by his actions for tolerance. This up here is Bashir Assad, King of Kings. Look on ye mighty in despair, and around this vast and trackless land. This is a poem from Pierce Bysshe Shelley. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on ye mighty in despair. Nothing beside remains round in that desert of this colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. And to me is where the artwork really gives me a voice, is this sense of tremendous frustration with the destruction of 25% of the Syrian population. I was fortunate to have visited Syria shortly before the civil war and met so many wonderful, welcoming people. And there's a tremendous sadness on a personal level on visiting and hearing this. This is a series of artwork that I've done. It's called Wade from the Water, Home, Safety, Refuge, for my children and myself. This artwork here is why children of Syria. The impact is always on the children of war. the displacement, the loss of home, the loss of family. And then in the middle, maybe something not so grave, is serial killers. On this project, which is actually almost done, this will next have the portraits of General Foods, the other cereal companies will have the posters for contributing to childhood obesity, diabetes, etc. But in this is help, prisoners of serial killers. Our aim as part of this project and as part of the Consume project is really looking at childhood and nutrition. One of the projects is called the Box Remedy. We give people empty boxes, they go to their house and fill it with their junk food. And they come back and we dump it in the middle of a gallery space, and then they take away a box of fresh fruit and vegetables. That awareness. This over here, sugar junkie, it's pretty self-explanatory, is the amount of sugar. I think the average American consumes, US American, consumes about 60 pounds of sugar per annum, corn syrup, sugar, etc., etc. And it's interesting for me as an artist is when I originally did this and I quickly sketched this out and I figured, oh, I'll come back to this. And then I realized I liked it just the way it was. Sometimes it's not important to get all fussy. This project here is called Viento Gritando. And this project I've been working on for several years. And it's a story of a girl, a woman we met in Valparaiso in Chile. And it was late at night and we were chatting. And it was coming close to 2 o'clock in the morning. And I said, well, we need to go to bed. And how about you? And she said, no, I never sleep at night. And we asked her. And so the story is, a Chilean woman spoke to me late into the night in Valparaiso about living during the time of Pinochet. And then she said, I was a girl of 8 when I first heard the screams at night. And my mother said, it's only the wind. But Mama, there is no wind tonight. She held me close to her head, held me close. No, it is a ferocious wind that is blowing across the land. The next night, the wind blew even fiercer with a screech. For the next month, it seemed like we were living in Terra del Fuego, where the wind never sleeps and the witches howl. But we were here in Valparaiso, safe from the sea. The wind shrieked in all the ways that it could through the night. At times, it was like a witch's torment, a biting cry from the soul. And at other times, when the pillow was tight around my ears, I could hear a man sob, para, stop, stop. But the wind never sobbed or screeched or yowled in the same way. It was persistent for a year. Some nights it blew like a wounded animal. It was curious the house did not quake or the shutters clatter, even with the fiercest wind. And when the wind blew the strongest, I ran to my mother's arms for refuge and held, and she stroked my head and said, Cámate, solo el viento. It is only the wind. This shall pass. And in the morning, the house was as silent as stone. And then she paused in her story. She said heavily, then it stopped. As an adult, I found out about the dictatorship of Pinochet, and I discovered there was a torture center 1 block from my house. No, I can never sleep at night, she said. The wind always howls and keeps me awake. No war. We need a future. Stop the wars. War is the problem. And this has been the focus of my work for many years. I'm a a Vietnam era veteran. And since the war, I've worked in terms of performance work, art, poetry, and I've spoken this voice about the impact of war and militarism in society. And this event is co-sponsored by the Vermont Veterans for Peace. It's called the Will Miller Chapter up in Montpelier. And we participate with many of the veterans in Vermont and, of course, nationally, talking about the impact of war and militarism in society. And so we've been very grateful for Vermont veterans for their support and help in this project. As I often say in this series of work, the body of work on the pornography of war over the last winter was about a 2,000 square foot gallery in New Orleans as part of the deadly ambiguity of guns. And I often take this, is that war is pornography. And I ask this, is what is more pornographic? Two people making love or two people trying to kill each other? And in particular, what I look at is the US military budget over $1.5 trillion, $789 billion for the annual budget, $700 billion in line item 050, the other third through Department of Energy and Homeland Security. And where this impacts, and for most Americans, everybody is waving this flag of patriotism, of fear, of terror. But the real terrorism, the real fear, is the poverty. 25% of elderly live in the United States impoverished. Over 30% of children malnourished. You look at 1 million people losing their homes because of health insurance, because of this poverty. And so to me, this is what I encourage people to consider. What is the impact of war and militarism? We even see this here in Vermont, the F-35, $150 to $200 million per plane, and communities destroyed in Burlington, over 40 homes taken away because the F-35 needs more room to fly. And in this, what is our responsibility to our soldiers? I was deeply moved some years ago, the story, tragically, of a Sergeant Bales who shot and killed 17 civilians in Afghanistan. And as I write in this poem, what is our responsibility to our soldiers? Today, as we speak, there are still between 25 to 35 returning veterans who commit suicide every day. That's over 8,000 a year. And how many now are living on the streets, uncared for, in prison? And this comes back to this. What is our responsibility to our soldiers? Sergeant Bales is a soldier who earned medals for bravery. This is Sergeant Bales. After he served 3 tours of duty in Iraq, he suffered multiple injuries, brain trauma, PTSD, and yet he was ordered back to war. Afghanistan, a quagmire and feudal, impoverished land where devout Muslims kill each other for the heroin trade and less. American soldiers killed by Afghani police and roadside bombs. Fields of poppies line the roads to Kabul. When Sergeant Bale killed 17 civilians, was he awake in a nightmare? Were the dying voices of fellow soldiers shrieking through his war-shocked brain? Did he even know what he did? How do we atone for those men, women, and children he killed? What is our obligation to Sergeant Bales and his family? What is our obligation to our soldiers and those killed? And I ask each one of you who are viewing this, is let us consider deeply. And as Major General Smedley Butler had said in his book, War is a Racket, he said this, one of the most distinguished veterans in 1935. He said, I want you to consider this. Would you send your son to battle, to be there in the mud, the sweat, and the blood? Would you sacrifice your child for war? Please, consider the words of Major General Butler, war is a racket. And he often asked that, what is the cost of war? What is the cost of war and militarism in society? This has been rendered into graphics and simply is the $1 trillion hunger, the Pentagon vulture. The money, the groups, Carlyle Groups, United Technologies, Exxon, Lobbyists United, Raytheon, KBR, Dynacor, Honeywell, Ray Systems. These are the military-industrial complex that General Eisenhower warned us of. In this, we talk about, is drones. Drones become the sanitized way to kill our enemies, or those enemies were told. Drones buzzing over Yemen, drones over Pakistan, drones swooping over. And when you hear the voice of people, they always say, whether or not it's in northern Pakistan, is the sound of drones 24/7. Drones sweeping over. No war has been declared on these people, and yet Tomahawk missiles dropping indiscriminately. And this, the poem, this very imperfect and difficult poems, war, drones buzzing death, insistent buzzing death, faceless killers buzzing death. And this to me was so instructive when I read this about one soldier. When instructed to kill someone he has stalked from the air for a prolonged period, this is what this drone pilot said. I feel no emotional attachment to the enemy. I have a duty and I execute my duty. David, U.S. Airman, drone pilot. And again, I look at the face of these children. What is our responsibility to these children? How do we raise our voice on these drones? These drone strikes that probably cost hundreds of millions of dollars every year. In this portrait, the cross of iron, this is what General Dwight David Eisenhower warned us of. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fire signifies in the final sense a theft from those who are hunger and not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. The world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. It is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. 1952. He continued in his farewell address, the military-industrial complex is this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. We must guard against the acquisition of unwanted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. And now, with the military budget soaring even further, over $1.5 trillion, according to the Project on Government Oversight, consider the cross of war and the cross of iron. In this poem, at the age of 19, there's an infinity of things to do better than at the age of 19, you can lie under a tree with your love, you can dance, you can play, you can hold your child, or just simply dream. Better than being a 19-year-old soldier reeking of fear and sweat in a hot desert country and wondering, is today the day you're going to die? At the age of 19. Here, continuing this homage, 40 million children, women killed, World War I. We hold this memory of war. War is not an abstract number of dollars and cents. It's measured in blood, tears. It's measured in the loss of life. And this piece that was created in homage to the armistice, we hold this in memoriam. This other series called Witness is part of a multimedia performance project based on my journeys, my travels and photographs in Israel and Palestine. And this was part of a wall, an art project in Boston. And this commemorates and speaks to the situation we're seeing now of the destruction of the Palestinian people and the communities. And also I ask, why is the United States spending over $40 billion to support the occupation and destruction of Palestinians? And for me, Jewish and American, I ask, how can we, Jews who have suffered so much, not be just? And this is the dilemma. Bibi Netanyahu and the Zionist dilemma. We stole their land, we imprisoned them, we killed their sons and daughters, but how do we kill their dreams and hopes? This, that we invite people to consider the occupation of Palestine, the apartheid. This other series is Do Black Lives Matter? We're all deeply traumatized and troubled by the killing of so many African Americans, Asians, minority, by the police. And on this, our goal is not to demonize all police, but we ask police to consider deeply their actions, their impact. Do Black Lives Matter? This homage to Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy that was killed in Cleveland, Ohio. And a policeman came out of the car in 3 seconds and shot him. He was playing with a toy gun. It could have been real. It could have been fake. Nevertheless, this boy was executed by the police in Cleveland, Ohio. And in this work, I ask and consider, how can we develop a more humane and just society, a society of peace, of tolerance, of acceptance? How do we as a society come together and create this vision of a future based on love, compassion, and care? And so I ask in these projects to consider this, and more importantly, for each one of you who is watching this, how are you engaged in your process of peace building? Like 100 flowers of peace, let there be 100 flowers of peace for every moment of war. Let there be 100 hours of love for each instance of violence. Let there be 100 acts of kindness for each moment of hate. Let there be 100 years of love for every moment of violence. Let there be 100 flowers of peace that bloom in the garden. Let there be 100 flowers of peace. And in this poem is the consideration, how do each one of us in our lives, no matter where we are, no matter what our ability, how do we create this intention of peace, of kindness, and of love? Thank you for your work for peace. My name is Namaya, and along with my wife, Zooey Kopp, we are creating peace and community building projects through Grace Cares. Also check us out on namayaproductions.com. And also thank
gracecares.org.
gracecares.org, and thank you to the many, many volunteers around the world. So thank you all. Be all you can be. Be for peace.
Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me dio dos luceros que cuando los abro perfecto distingo lo negro del blanco y en el alto cielo su fondo estrellado y en las multitudes el hombre que yo amo. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado el sonido y el abecedario, con él las palabras que pienso y de